Today's talk is on dependent origination. It's what the Buddha awakened to. It's a very misunderstood teaching, misapplied in many ways, and it's actually a very simple and direct teaching, although it is the heart of the matter, so it's very profound and it's very deep. Let me bring up dependent origination onto the screen. There it is. So I think you can both see that. The first link in this chain of dependencies is ignorance. And it is a very specific type of ignorance. It's ignorance of the Four Noble Truths, the simple understanding of the true nature of reality in this human world that we live in. And then through these following links, we end up with suffering. And that is what the Buddha first taught. The Buddha didn't start his teachings with presenting dependent origination. He didn't teach that until much later. It's very hard to determine exactly the first time that he taught it, because the Pali Canon is not in chronological order. But it was after there was a good understanding and a frame of reference for people to understand this teaching. And but so it states that from ignorance as a requisite condition, as a dependency, comes fabrications. And so the first thing that arises from from ignorance of Four Noble Truths is mental fabrications or thought constructs about how we view the world. But now remember that it is rooted in that initial ignorance. So anything that follows from ignorance will not have a clear view or will be ignorant of what it's observing. From those initial mental fabrications comes consciousness. And this is another interesting way that the Buddha presents this. So we have a tendency to believe that there is some type of grand consciousness in the universe that kind of rules everything and that we're all a part of. And maybe that's so. But that is irrelevant as far as dependent origination is concerned. What the Buddha's teaching here is that from ignorance of Four Noble Truths comes a way of thinking or ongoing consciousness that is itself rooted in ignorance. So everything goes back to that first link in the chain. And then from consciousness, from this ongoing ignorant or confused or deluded thinking, as a requisite condition, as a dependency, comes name and form. So name and form is written in the Pali as nama rupa. And so name or nama means self-identification. We identify ourselves with this physical form. So name and form, we start combining the two. Our thinking becomes attached or clinging to the form that we identify with. So from name and form as a requisite condition comes the sixth sense base. And this is interesting how you follow this link. So the sixth sense bases are five physical senses, plus the sixth sense of our ongoing consciousness. But remember, it's that consciousness that is rooted in ignorance. So the interpretation that we're taking through our senses is itself rooted in ignorance, excuse me, and can only reaffirm those fabrications that we've developed from ignorance. From the sixth sense base comes contact. So we first have to have senses in order to have contact. And so from that sixth sense base, we engage in the outside world through contact through those senses. And from that contact comes feeling. And so feeling can be any type of feeling, from a direct physical feeling to any type of emotional agitation, to any impression that we're getting through our senses. From that initial contact that creates the feeling, now comes craving. So we've established ourselves in our bodies and in our minds as an individual self, remember, rooted in ignorance. But now through the contact with our senses, desire starts arising. And we have something that makes us feel good through our senses, and we want more of it. Or something creates an aversion in our minds and in our reaction, and we want less of it. But that act of craving, that act of desire, leads to the next and probably the most important part of this chain, clinging and maintaining. Once we've established an identity rooted in ignorance, and desire gives rise to craving, we then create an identity. And once an identity is created around any object, we are now clung to it. We are clinging to it because we've created an identity by that. And that is ongoing maintenance. And I'll touch on how that relates to the second noble truth in just a minute. So from that clinging and maintaining as a requisite condition comes becoming. And this can be looked at as giving birth. And it's giving birth in a literal sense that we don't have time to get into. But what's most important about the teachings on birth and rebirth is that we are giving birth in this moment to an experience that is rooted in ignorance and driven by craving and clinging. And that is the key to understanding dependent origination. And it is at this point that you can say that dependent origination has led to the beginning of time in this moment. And so I'm not talking about a grand cosmic creation myth, as is often given to dependent origination, and it describes creation. It does not. It simply describes how we create suffering from ignorance and an ongoing suffering. So this whole chain of dependencies leads us to this point where we've now given birth to a confused, deluded view of life that is prone to an unsatisfactory experience or dukkha. The next chain is from giving birth to an ignorant experience comes actual birth. And so again, we're not talking in a grand cosmic sense even about reincarnation. What's most important is what we're giving birth to in this moment. And from becoming as a requisite condition comes birth. Then from birth as a requisite condition comes aging, sickness, death, sorrow, regret, pain, distress, and despair, which is how the Buddha described dukkha. So from that initial ignorance, as a requisite condition through 12 observable causative links, comes dukkha. The Buddha's very first teaching to those 5 buddies that he had while he was wandering around northern India was the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the sutta that he presented the 4 noble truths. And so the first noble truth is there is dukkha, or dukkha occurs. He's simply describing the result of initial ignorance. Then the second noble truth is craving originates and clinging perpetuates dukkha. So that is the individual contribution that we all make as human beings to this ongoing problem of dukkha. Now remember that it's rooted in ignorance. So the way out of continually creating this problem of dukkha is to gain wisdom, or to develop an understanding of how this process begins and how we continue it. The third noble truth is that the cessation of dukkha is possible. And the fourth noble truth is that the Eightfold Path is a path developing an understanding of the 4 noble truths. And so as we engage, let me just check the time, I don't want to go too long. As we engage and develop the Eightfold Path, we can interrupt these chain of dependencies. And any time that we interrupt even one of these chain of dependencies, the whole chain falls apart. And so another way of saying that is when we can deeply penetrate dependent origination and reverse this process, then we achieve awakening or full human maturity. And so look at maybe the link from craving as a requisite condition comes clinging and maintaining. If we can interrupt that craving by understanding the process that you create craving through the 6th sense base through desire, then we're interrupting the next chain of dependencies, which is clinging and maintaining. So if we can deal with the problem of craving and understand that and abandon craving, we've broken this link of dependencies and we've broken dependent origination. And again, the whole chain of dependencies falls apart. And so you can really say that everything the Buddha taught, well, I often say everything the Buddha taught for 45 years was in the context of the 4 noble truths. And you can also say that it's in the context of dependent origination. So this is it's an important teaching, but it's not something that we should overly analyze. It's simply a list and a direction to show how we've created dukkha in our own lives and to understand the process of undoing that. So let me take that off the screen. Again, I don't want to go on too long, but I'd like to invite you on the screen if you have any questions about this. So let me do this. I'm just doing this for the first time. So Tracy, let me invite you on the screen. And if you'd like to, please join us. And then I'll invite Todd on the screen. And Todd, if you'd like to, please join me. And if you have any questions. I think there's instructions on your screen on how to join. I hope there is. Again, I'm new to this technology too. But so I'll give you a minute to see if you can get on screen.
There?
Nope. Okay. Tracy, it says you're on screen, but I don't see you.
I don't see me either.
Let me just click on your name. If I knock you off now, that won't do it. I don't know why. Let me try this. That might be it. But I don't see it. I've given you a screen, but I don't see you coming up on it. Hang in there for a minute. I'm gonna ask that you be removed, Tracy, and then I'm gonna invite you on again. Let's just see what happens. And I invited you again, Todd. If you'd like to join us, just follow the instructions. Tracy, are you on? I don't know why this isn't working. I wish it would. No. Oh, Todd, I see your question there. So I hope you can hear me. So an example of interrupting the chain, we could start with the first one. From ignorance comes mental fabrications. Mental fabrications is another way of saying conditioned thinking or hardened views that we've created around the world. So once we can start understanding that we've created fabrications in our life and let them go, we're diminishing that initial ignorance. And so we're directly affecting that part of the chain. And again, I don't want to create an analytical way of looking at it or a fixation on any one part of it. But as we diminish the effects of that original ignorance, the chain of dependencies no longer causes the ultimate response or reaction, which is dukkha. So does that answer your question? I hope it does. If not, please let me know. And Tracy, I see that there's a screen there, but I don't see you or hear you. And it shows that your mic and at least on my screen, it shows that,
Oh, there I am.
It was on my end. Well, but I don't see you.
You don't see me?
No, but I do hear you.
Oh, okay. Okay, I can see me and I can see you.
I don't know why you're not on screen, but it's nice to hear your voice. How are you doing today?
Very good, thank you.
Good. Let me just get back to Todd for a minute. Todd, if I didn't answer your question clearly, please just type another question in and I'll go into it a little bit deeper. Tracy, do you have any questions about this morning's talk or this afternoon's talk?
My one question, from ignorance all the way through feeling,
yes,
all those chains I see as conditioned thinking. Is that right?
Yes, you can certainly describe all of it because it starts in that initial ignorance that leads to fabrication. So another word for, in a general sense, fabrications is conditioned thinking. We've created thought constructs that we now see ourselves in relation to the world. And so the Dhamma ultimately is about recognizing all of these self-referential views, another word for conditioned thinking, another word for fabrications, recognizing all of our self-referential views as just that and simply abandoning them. And as we do that, and this relates to Todd's question too, as we understand and abandon our own self-referential views rooted in that ignorance, an awakened, a fully mature human being develops. And that's really the whole process. Of course, it's quite deep and profound, and it's not all that simple, but it is that direct. So great question, Tracy, and great question, Todd. Thank you.
And what about I get mixed up consciousness in general compared, I understand the sixth sense base, but consciousness.
Yeah, I think a lot of people get caught up in it. And I was too when I first went through this, and I wasn't. We need to remember that everything the Buddha taught was in the context of the Four Noble Truths and a very specific purpose to recognize and abandon the cause of suffering. So even if there is such a thing as some grand consciousness that we're all a part of, and the reason why I bring that up is I think we get caught up in looking at our own thought process and the word consciousness as some grand cosmic experience, when all that we're talking about here is the consciousness that arises that's rooted in ignorance.
Okay.
So that's an ongoing thought process that, since it's rooted in ignorance, can only produce another moment that's rooted in ignorance.
Okay.
And so as we change our thinking, change our views, that consciousness now becomes something that can be useful. And I know you've heard me say this quite a few times, Tracy, and that points to the potential of each moment. Because each moment, if we're developing right view and following that right thinking, then each moment holds the potential to continue to incline our minds towards awakening and away from further confusion, delusion, and suffering rooted in that ignorance.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so it's clear that there's, we're just talking about an ongoing thought process that's rooted in conditioned thinking. And so another way of looking at the entire path is to recognize and abandon any type of conditioned thinking, which means that in this moment, we're seeing life clearly. There's no conditions that we're placing on it through our own ignorant views. So any other questions, Tracy or Todd?
No, thank you.
I think those were great questions. So I don't want to go too far. Oh, there's somebody else who has joined us. Let me just check who that is. Keith, you're on. Keith, do you want to? Let me invite you on screen and see if you have any questions before we meditate. And so, Keith, if you want to join us for a minute, just follow the instructions on screen, and you should be visible. All right, I'll check in with all three of you again after we meditate if you have any questions or comments. So let's meditate. We'll have a 20-minute Shamatha-Vipassana meditation. And gently close your eyes. Gently close your mouth. And take a moment to become aware of the sensation of breathing in your body. Just get a feel for what that's like. To be mindful of your breath in your body. And while remaining mindful of your breath in your body, notice that thoughts are flowing. We're conscious beings, thoughts should be flowing. The purpose of Shamatha-Vipassana meditation is to not be distracted by our own thoughts. So when you find that you're caught up in your thinking again, simply acknowledge that and return your mindfulness to the sensation of breathing. I'll repeat that. When you find that you're caught up in your thinking again, simply acknowledge that and return your mindfulness to the sensation of breathing. And we'll meditate for 20 minutes with callbacks every 5. Relaxing thoughts, remaining mindful of our breathing. Relaxing thoughts, remaining mindful of our breathing. Relaxing thoughts, remaining mindful of our breathing. If a persistent thought or feeling arises, Stay with it for a moment or two. Recognize it as impermanent and return your mindfulness to the sensation of breathing. And we'll meditate for 5 more minutes. Take a moment to notice the quality of your mind. Be at peace with your mind. And when you're ready, you can gently open your eyes. Mm. Thank you. Thank you, Trace. Thanks for joining me today. Thank you, Todd. Thank you, Keith. I'd like to finish, if you still have a few minutes, with the Buddha's words on metta. And next week's class will be on the fire discourse. And there's info on the website about that and another recording. The Karaniya Metta Sutta shows that the most loving and compassionate action that anyone can take is to engage wholeheartedly with the direct teachings of the Buddha and awaken. And these are the Buddha's words on metta. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied. Unburdened with duties and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud or demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove. Wishing, in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings. Radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will. Whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. By not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into this world. So thank you all for a wonderful class today. We'll meet again next week. I hope you can all join me, and we'll get some of these technical glitches worked out. But it was so nice for you to join me. See you next week. Peace.